So, shall we start? Not sure. I'm looking at the president. Yes, okay. So good morning, everyone. I think people can hear me at the Zoom as well. Looking at the back. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so good morning, everyone. At this final session this morning at Ruralia for this year. We have some interesting 2 lectures today. We're traveling to Russia and to the Netherlands and looking at household goods. We've seen household goods from a variety of perspectives until now. We're looking at household goods from as an indication of activity. We will be looking this morning for the coffee break. We will look at locks and keys and bones and antlers. So quite a different set of presentations. We will start with Russia, of course, with Anastasia Fedorina. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Is Anastasia there?
Yes, hello. I'm online.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And she's going to tell us something about how locks and keys and will open up new doors, pun intended, for further research. So, Anastasia, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. I hope you can see my presentation and everything, and you can hear me. The theme of our conference were goods, and the new reality of huge amount of metal detecting finds pushed me to take one group of such finds, of metal detecting finds, keys and locks, and try to look at them precisely. And at the beginning, this 3, 4, 10 keys and locks from one household, which we find in the excavated areas on the rural sites, with a huge amount of keys and locks which can be which was produced and found in urban centers. For example, for Novgorod, for one of the famous and large centers, urban centers of Russia, we have more than 2,000 keys and lock. And in this dimension, it seems that for rural settlements, it's really rare find. But if we change the scale, if we try to look, to observe the collection from the historic land, for example, like the Source de la Polye, where we go to today, we see that situation isn't so easy, isn't so simple. It's quite complicated. Source de la Polye, it's I need to say some words about this region to involve you in these problems. Source de la Polye, it's one of the large rural region of the northern Rus, and it's important center not only from the economical or from the administrative point of view. It's one of the most powerful princedom for the 12th, 13th century, but it was a very important agricultural center. It's the center which sometimes export the grains to the other Russian lands, for example, for Novgorod, and it's a completely rural region. As you can see on this map in the right corner, you can find only 3 urban centers, they marked by red, and a lot of dots, of green dots, which are unfortified rural settlements. These parts, these areas which was colored by pink, it's the areas of which was totally solved, examined by our expedition, and we collect more than 16,000 of metal finds, not only metal, but mainly metal finds. And you see that this settlement structure is very dense. It's very huge density of settlement of different times, but they all are medieval. And if we, now I need to go, now I need to say some words about methodology of our works. It's important when the majority of sites, of archaeological sites of the region, completely plowed. Now we're in fields, and the cultural layer mixed, but we lose only the vertical dimension, the stratigraphy of these finds, but we still have the all chronology, all the assemblage of these finds from the settlement. And the second important part is that the planography of the settlement still well preserved, even if this settlement plowed by the centuries of agricultural activity. Here you can see the same excavation pit from the Большое Давыдовское settlement, but the different chronological periods of this and material of this which was found in this excavation. One for the earlier part of material, the handmade pottery from this disturbed layer, and the objects of the 10th, 11th century in the base layer, which was fixed in the base layer, and the situation for the later material, for the wheel-made pottery, ceramics, and the other objects. And you can see that the difference of the distribution of material can't be understood only by plowing. The structure is very different, and it means that it's preserved really good. And for the sites which I'm going to speak about today, we have geomagnetic surveys, and this data help us to find the borders of different households. Of course, these borders isn't really clear. They are smooth a little bit because of this plowing, because of this distortion, but still it's enough for understanding the structure of this settlement, the structure of these plain fields, which we have now. So now we return to the keys and locks. From these 16,000 of items, we have more than 500 finds of locks and keys, and they was collected from more than 100 settlements. So every fourth settlement of the region produce such goods. And from one point of view, the first thing which you are going to think about is that it's very common and ordinary finds. But if we look on it from the a little bit deeper, we understand that the picture isn't so simple. First of all, if we compare the two maps, the maps of settlement and map of the key and lock distribution, we see that there is no real system in them, in this map. We can say that only, for example, main central settlements produce such find. No, we see a very diverse picture. And the second important thing which we note, locks and keys, one of the most common group of artifacts which we can find on the settlement. You can see that we have a lot of knives, it's not surprised, a lot of different parts of costume and decoration, but all other things, even spindle balls, which are really useful and in huge amount for the textile production, are less preserved for this settlement than the locks and keys. These such of goods are, of course, they are very standard. Typologically, they are very standard. They are, and it helps us in our work because we can use them as the chronological markers. Yes, we know that some of these types have these periods of their life overlapped, but still we can check with trends of changes in usage of these items, even if they are not so detailed as we wish. And if we look, if we try to divide all this collection to the some large chronological period, we see that in the beginning we have, for 10th, beginning of 11th century, we have a very small collection of locks and keys, but it's rapidly increased in the second period and the 11th, beginning of 12th century, when the power of the princedom arose, and the main period for this region, the most important period for this region, it's large enough, but still we can divide it more precisely. The 12th, 13th century produce a huge amount of these finds. And it's not only the number of finds, it's a number of sites. You see that with increasing, of course, we can explain this situation only as a first step as a normal situation when in colonization of region. The population rised, and of course we need to make new settlements, we need to use new lands, and we go on them. But in this moment, it's interesting that for the earlier period, we have this finds really unique for the settlement, even if it's settlement really large. If we go, if we came to later time, we see that we have not only the number of sites which produce such items increased, but the series of these finds which we can find from the one settlement precisely, it's the look of this, the image of this finds. If we start, if we look on the earliest group, you can see it in the left corner. There is no decorated issue at all. They are very simple. It seems that it was enough to show that you have a key, because you need to lock something to demonstrate your welfare and maybe a social status, but that all keys are really good decorated. The handle is made of different parts. They fit this
Let's see if Anastasia hears us. Sorry to interrupt, Anastasia.
Interesting things, especially.
Sorry, can I interrupt you for a moment? Yes. Okay, so the connection is a bit bad, so we have some interruptions and some trouble hearing you. Would it be an option for you to switch off your camera temporarily?
Yes,
maybe
try to
improve
do it.
Okay, thank you very much. And could you rephrase the last minute shortly?
Okay.
Summarize a little bit. Thank you.
I hope now it's everything good, a little bit better. So we return to the decoration and visual image, the look of this case. In the beginning, for the early period, for the 10th, beginning of 11th century, were really simple. There is no decoration at all. The handles were really simple, without any structure on it. For the second period, for the 11th, beginning of 12th century, it's the situation completely changed. Nearly the majority of the keys are really good decorated, especially these handles became more complicated, and it seems that it's a part of symbolic system of visualization of welfare of these settlers, of this medieval people. In the beginning, it seems that it was enough to have only to have a key and demonstrate that you are rich enough to lock something. In the second period, they need to increase this symbolic part of these items. And later in the 12th, 13th century, the situation completely changed. We see that they are not only become the mass production fins, but they return to simplicity of the key. They are mainly just functional fin, but not a symbolic part. But still we have one, the third part of this later keys are still decorated, and we return to it a little bit later. Of course, the most good illustration for this symbolic part of the not functional part of the case. It's this issues which have a bronze inlaying on it, and it's a part of the same cultural material culture of the riders and horse equipment, which was decorated by the same in same way. So for these things, it seems we can use them as the markers of not only a welfare, but maybe a upper status or social status for the people who have them. But the important thing is that it's still very diverse system. For example, the earliest group of finds mainly was found on the settlements of the central settlement for the region. You see that there's settlements, sites with huge settled area, but one of these one of this cave was found on the very small settlement, which produced a really poor collection, not only the metal finds, but the ceramic part of collection is really poor too, and it's out of the centers. So it's the system isn't so straight as we can think in the beginning. But let's look for the example which suits better to this idea of welfare and the markers of this welfare, the caves and logs as the markers of this welfare. It's one of the settlements which are not really large, but and it's not far away from Southwestern, but this settlement produced a really large collection of finds, and you can see that the difference of the diversity of groups of these finds are really large. It's not only everyday new things like knives and sharpeners and spindle balls, but it's a good collection of agricultural equipment and a wonderful group of weaponry and horse and rider equipment. I need to say that it's not, this is a part, this finds connected with the riders, but not with the agricultural horse. It's important for this moment. And the spurs and stirrup. So that's place which we can associate it with the lower part of nobility of the region. And if you can see how diverse this household, the main household which we can find on this settlement, the finds from this main household marked in blue in this map. And if we look where we can, if we look on the distribution of finds of this main household, we see that the main group of caves and logs, I should say that the most beautiful one of them, compare in the place with the most diverse part of collection, which can be associated with the main house of this household. And some of these finds, they marked here as a yellow triangular dots, and some part of films we can find on the household periphery. And that's important, but the most interesting thing is that the finds of logs and caves we can find not only in the main household of the settlement, but in the households which we can find on the periphery. Here you can see them as orange marks. And it's important that these smaller households not really poor. The material culture of these households still on the good level of welfare. It's a really good finds like parts of amphora from the north of the Byzantium. So let's go further and go to the next period, to the 12th, 13th century, and it will be an absolutely different side from the social point of view. This is the settlement, which is a part of the larger historical village, which was known from the early 14th century when it was given to one of the Suzdal monastery, and it was in the previous time it was a part of the domain of the Moscow Rurikoviches. So we are sure that there is no landlord household on this settlement. It's the only upper social layers which we can try to find in this place. It will be the headman of the settlement or some how the parts of administration of this princedom principal administration. And let's look on. Well, the situation is completely the same as usual, everything plowed and everything mixed. And the problem is that this settled area was used twice, but hopefully we have a break between these two building horizons, between the break in the 11th century and the second period when this settlement was used, was the living period of the settlement, starts somewhere in the middle of the 12th century, and it seems that it wasn't really large, really long line for the settlement. And of course, we have a huge amount of finds, and we have a lot of pottery, which collected by these square polygons. That help us to write this, to make these borders of household, to understand the structure of the settlement, and we can understand the structure for the two periods. The early one, when we have the finds of locks and keys only in one household on the western part of the settlement, and I should say that from this part, from this household, we collect not only these keys and locks, but a lot of jewelry and the coins, the Arabian coins from this household. And the second one isn't so rich, but the difference of this material culture level isn't really large. But the most interesting piece is the structure of this 12th, 13th century period of the settlers of this area. Here we can find around 8 different households which are stay nearby each other, and you can see here the locks and keys marked as red rhombs, and you can see that we have no really difference between these households. They are different in size, they are different in the diversity of material objects which we can find on them, but on all of them we find this group in question. Of course, for the most richest, the most largest households, we can find them as a series, not only the unique finds, but the but their level of well-being and welfare is still very high. I think it's not really surprising for this region because, as I said in the beginning, it was a region which was exporter of the grain for this period. It was the agricultural base for the northern Rus, and of course there was this peasants was producer of this grain, but maybe not a provider, but still it helped them to have a really high level of well-being of everyday life. And it's not the last example of this distribution of the category in question. It would be a site where we can compare this written sources reality with the archaeological reality. It's the settlement which was which we know from the written sources from the 15th century, and we have the collection of finds of the same time which produce the same settlement. And if we look on this distribution of finds where the keys and locks mark in red, we see the same situation. We can find there is no real concentration of this find. Every household, we can find them in all concentration of finds, but there is no real concentration of the group of this find. So it seems that it hard to use the keys and locks in the situation as the markers of social status, but it can be markers of the welfare. And the last thing which I want to talk about, it's this decorated keys and lock from the later period, for the 13th, 14th century. As I said, this group of finds isn't really large. Only a third part of this chronological group was decorated. But it was quite surprised for me at the end that every time when we have such huge and decorated case from this later group, we find them on the quite large settlement with a very diverse material culture. So if for the ordinary standard types case, we can use them as the markers of everything, we can use them only as a marker of ordinary welfare of the region. For these decorative things, items, we still can use them as the markers of the higher level of welfare and maybe status. And it was it's important to say that the same situation was fixed for the urban centers of Russia. 30 years ago, one of our colleagues, Stashova, made the same work with the case of 14th century from Novgorod, and she can divide them into groups: the standard types, with standard size, without any decoration, and the case which was really large, really decorated, and they always were founded on the estates which was associated with Novgorodian boyars, so with Novgorodian elites. I think it's quite good result of my research, which shows the potential of this usage of mass material which was produced by this metal detection work. And to conclude all my presentation, I just read these conclusions. So we are sure that locks and key are part not only of the urban everyday culture, but for the rural landscape also they are very important part of this material culture. And sometimes for some epochs, the locks and keys, especially keys, can be used as the part of the system of manifestation of high social status or level of welfare. And as this part of this symbolic part of this category was increased in the epoch when of active transformation of social status, of power, of changes of the power centers, but can be less important for the other periods. And the changes of the features help us to see the transformation of power centers, of economical function of different territories, in case when written sources have not enough data for this question. And it helps us to analyze the life standards of ordinary rural population and somehow a social organization on the local level. Thank you very much. I hope that you hear the second part of my presentation.
So thank you, Anastasia. I think the second part we heard pretty good. So it was fine, and the first part was also pretty understandable. Somewhere in between. Okay. We had some problems, but you solved it perfectly. Thank you. Are there any questions? Because you showed us a very interesting story, I think, about especially on multiple scales. So I can imagine some questions in the room, for example. Does anyone have a mark?
Anastasia, I wonder whether the increase in locks that you are seeing is about a growing insecurity in society rather than necessarily about growth in wealth as well. Do you think that's possible?
Thank you, Mark, for the question. I think it's a two sides of the same coin, because they need to lock something to take it to make it secure, but they need to have something to lock for the situation.
Fair enough, yes.
Thank you. Any Bert?
Thank you very much, Anastasia, for this excellent paper. I'm really
Thank you.
impressed by the level of detail and the clever way of approaching these sites. I'm amazed by the sheer number of metal finds. We have been discussing this subject.
Yes, it's a.
One could imagine a catastrophic ending of all these sites, but
There is no catastrophic ending of the sites. It's this huge amount of metal, especially iron objects, which we can find of this settlement. It's as now we understand, it's a normal for this material culture of this region.
But I'm sorry, but they didn't recycle it. They didn't recycle metal. They just throw it away, or?
It seems so. It seems so. They don't care about the recycling of this metal, of this iron. And I should say that we have a large series of sites which where we can find the metal slags, the iron slags. So it seems that production of iron wasn't a problem for them. That's why they was so, how to say, that's why they don't care about it so much. I should say that not only the iron objects are so large, we have a lot of ceramics series. So it's the culture where they don't care about this waste.
That's good to know. So thank you. Are there any other questions? Are there online questions? No. Well, then I think we'll move on, but thank you again for this very, very interesting paper.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to make it.
So we move on to the Netherlands then, and we have a paper on, like I said, on bone material and ender material, over 14,000 finds and a synthesis. It's a paper from Kini Escher, Marloes Rijkelijkhuizen, Jorn Zeiler, Joyce van Dijk, and Leida van Ees. So there's a lot of people actually, but I understood, Jorn, you were giving the presentation. So Jorn, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. I will try to start to share my screen.
Thank you.
I hope it works. Do you see it?
No, we still see you.
Okay. Let me see how to do this. I see my presentation myself, but I see that I don't.
Do you have a second screen, Jorn, or
Okay.
are you working only on your laptop?
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
Share, okay.
Something's happening.
Yep, I think it's working. Yeah. Oh.
Yes, we see it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, well, I think it's...
Yeah, if you put it in presenting mode, then...
Yep, I try to do that.
Bottom right is also an option. Je kunt, als je rechtsonder gaat, heb je naast het in- en uitzoomen een dingetje staan. Dan kun je ook nog op klikken. Nog eentje naar rechts. Nee, nog twee verder naar rechts.
Deze?
Ja, die diavoorstelling, ja. Dat is...
Aha, ja.
It helps reading Dutch.
Okay, it's easier, yeah. Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. You can see me now, you can see my presentation, that's the most important. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I will tell you something about the projects I'm working on at the moment with a couple of colleagues of mine. about artifacts and household items made of gelatinous and bone material and in the Netherlands. And I do this presentation on behalf of myself, but also on behalf of my colleagues Marloes Rijkelijkhuizen, Kini Esser, Joyce van Dijk, and Leida van Hees. So to introduce the project to you, it's part of the so-called Knowledge for Archaeology program within the framework of the Harvest from Malta program of the Cultural Heritage Agency, the RC, the Netherlands. And it's also being paid by the RCE. Our research team consists of the following persons. From Archaeoplan Eco, it's Kini Esser, Leida van Hees, Ronnie Kost, and Ulrich Rabé. They are responsible for the database and the catalog. And Joyce van Dijk, she is also working on the database and the catalog, but also on the synthesis of the prehistory. And from Elpenbeen is Marloes Rijkelijkhuizen. She is responsible for the synthesis of the Roman period up to the modern period. And at last, myself, I'm working on the synthesis of the prehistory. So as you can see already, there are three main parts of our research. We have a database, a catalog, and a synthesis. So the aim of our research is to improve to improve the knowledge of artifacts made from osseous and gelatinous materials found in the Netherlands by means of an inventory, a systematic inventory, and a basic analysis of the finds. And what we intend to have as results is a scientific synthesis supplemented by a catalog, and these two will provide a set of knowledge on this topic that's missing so far for the Netherlands. And for the analysis, we use the database, and it also will serve as a source of information for third parties after the project is finished. So what does the study include? Well, it includes all osseous and gelatinous materials as they occur in the publication of Rijkelijkhuis 2008, of which you see a picture on the right side of the slide. So being bone, different types of antler and ivory, horn, tortoise shell, baleen and hoof, and supplemented with tooth and shell. It includes artifacts from all archaeological regions, including the North Sea and the continental shelf, and it includes artifacts from the Paleolithic onward to recent times. Not only artifacts, but also production waste is included. And I must say it's a category that's sometimes hard to trace in the reports. It's not always described as such. So we had quite a problem to find it back in the publications we consulted. The data we use are from three sources. First of all, the finds and descriptions from reports of the so-called development-led archaeology, the Malta reports. They were implemented since 1997 and focusing on the period 2005-2017. Secondly, we got data from important unpublished finds from depots and museums. And thirdly, relevant publications from before 1997. Our working procedure has been to send requests to all our colleagues for reports and museum and depot inventories, and making visits to depots and museums, which as you can understand, was quite problematic during the last 1.5 years due to COVID-19. We intended to visit more depots and museums than we could in the end, but well, that's the way it is. And at last, we got data from 5 museum collections, 11 collections from archaeological depots, both municipal and provincial, and 415 reports, many of them provided by colleagues, which we are, of course, very grateful. The database, already mentioned by Rowan in the beginning, contains at the moment almost 14,500 objects, of which about half is from late medieval to modern context. A problem is that a part of the object is not dated, about 3,400 of them. The majority is probably medieval. We hope to find it out more about that. And the inventory stopped last spring, and the online database, as I told already, will be available for third parties after the project is finished. And a data set from the database is queried to provide information for the synthesis. And to give you a quick impression of the structure of the database, I'll show you this slide. I won't go into in detail. That's no use. But as you can see, you can all kinds of categories. You can find data about the publications in which the finds are described. You can find the names of the researchers that who describe the finds, data about technology, data about user analysis, about measurements, etc. So whatever information you want from the database about the object, you can get it. And that's the way we make the synthesis. The catalog, you see here one example of one page of the catalog. This case for bus bones. Category is toys and games. You see the geographical spreading of the bus bones throughout the Netherlands, the spreading in time, and then a picture of an example of this object with the data where it was found and the dating of the object. So this is the way how the catalog will look for each different type of object. The synthesis consists of 3 parts. I already mentioned a bit about it in the beginning. The prehistoric period from the Paleolithic onwards during the Iron Age until 12 BC. The Roman period to the early Middle Ages, that's 12 BC until 1050 AD, and the late Middle Ages to the modern age, which is 1050 AD to recent times. And for each period, we discuss the themes of function, technology and user materials, daily life, and trade and craft. And in the first part, function, technology, and user materials, we also include a time chronological overview of the finds of each time period. And then we talk about tools, agriculture and craft, things like adzes and axes and chisels, gouges, etc. Weaponry, both hunting, fishing, and military, things like spears and fish hooks and harpoons. Household items, items of personal hygiene, items of personal adornment and religion, implements for textile production, musical instruments, games and toys like the bus bones we saw already, and then group other and unknown. And as I said, after that part, the second and third part of the synthesis are objects in daily life and craft and trade. But to give you a very quick view of some of the results we got, the preliminary results, I show this slide of categories for the late medieval and the modern period. As you can see, for example, the most numerous categories are games and toys with a total of 1,264 items. And personal hygiene items with 1,143 items, and unfortunately also the unknown category with more than 1,600 items. I highlighted in red 3 categories of which I will show you some examples in a minute: household items, needlework, and personal hygiene items. Some examples of household goods, the kitchen gear, for example. At the left, you see a beautiful butter scoop. It was found in the late medieval castle of Egmond in the western part of the Netherlands. And 2 spoons, one made of bone, and the left and the right one made of antler. And this last one, the right one made of antler, the broken spoon, was found at an artificial dwelling mound, Turp of Wijnaldum, in the north part of the Netherlands, and it dates from the early medieval period. Needles, we have lots of needles with and without eye. This is one with an eye, an example of a needle case. Then some things about personal hygiene, lots of combs also, all kinds of types. You see here 2 types, the one-sided comb and the double-sided comb. A toothbrush, a brush, and this is one of my favorites, an artificial denture made of ivory. It was found in the city of Alkmaar in the western part of the Netherlands. And by the way, also this brush comes from the same city. So these are a few examples. Yeah, it's still work in progress. So I hope you have an impression now of what the project is like. And maybe on the next occasion, I or one of my colleagues can tell you much more about the results of this project. So, well, for the moment, thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you, Jorn, for this very interesting presentation. And also, it's always nice to see a very incomprehensible database overview.
Yeah, it's quite complicated. I understand.
Yeah. It always makes me happy to see Microsoft Access. Are there any questions in the room? All the way in the back.
Thank you very much. This is a quite huge database. Is it also available for us that we can use it and put our questions on this database?
Well, I guess so. It's available for third parties. So, but perhaps Kini, you can tell more about it. Am I right that it's accessible for everyone?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question because I have an unstable connection. But the database will be later on. The database will be online. There will be a database in Danse Easy. That's also accessible database provider in the Netherlands. But we also make a database online, and it's accessible to everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
And so I will give a follow-up question. Do we have an estimate of when you plan to go online?
Next year.
Next year, that's a good one.
Yeah, next year.
Yeah.
2022, that's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and just to elaborate a little bit, the first part which she mentioned, storing it in Danse Easy, that's a repository, so you could also download the entire data set, so you're not only stuck on the web version, but you can also download it yourself. Are there any other questions, comments? Do we have anything online? No? Then I still have one boring question, probably. Really. So sorry in advance. Did you make during the inventory? Do you also use a set thesaurus or something for the terms you use?
Sorry, use a.
Do you also apply or make use of a thesaurus? So for all the different, because you have a lot of metadata stored around the objects, that's really nice. It gives you a lot of but there's also a lot of information stored there as well. And certain things are, of course, typically connected, for example, to a heritage thesaurus or something else. Do you have a set number of terms you use, or is there any standardization on that?
Yeah, we have a lot of terms, but we've also had a lot of discussions about the terms. So,
Well,
yeah.
maybe I can help you.
Mhm.
We had another approach, Rowan, because we knew that it was very difficult to find objects with terms in, like they did for instance, farming in the
Mhm.
towns and farm.
Yeah, yeah.
It was very difficult to make terms and just look with terms through all the reports. So we started to to ask all our colleagues for delivering reports. So we didn't have to look at all that's why we didn't look at thousands of reports with terms and looking if maybe there's something about objects of bone and antler, but we ask our colleagues to give their reports.
Oh, okay, perfect.
That
But then
was
it's
Direct approach. Yeah.
because we discussed to use the terms in reports like they did for the city project for farming in the city, and they said, well, that would probably not work because there are too much terms to use, because someone is calling a skate from bone or a bony skate, or it is there are lots of terms used for different projects, or a knife from bone, or a bony knife, or a osseous knife, or whatever. So that's we thought now, but that will not work. So we did it the other way around.
yeah, that's a common problem, of course. And
Yeah.
it's nice because now you can do it the other way around. Now we can use your data set to actually improve the standardized terms we should use.
Yes,
So it
maybe,
works.
I
It works
hope
both
so.
ways. So thank you very much. Are there any questions, remarks? No. Then I would suggest that I would like to thank you, both contributors this morning. I would look there because that's the high.
Thank you very much.
So
You're welcome.
thank you very much for your
It was a
contributions.
pleasure. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And I think we will postpone a little bit for coffee. Okay, we will. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Hello? No?
Yes, but they have to turn it on.
Hello? Okay. It seems that we are starting now, and I am in the situation to invite you to the last two papers, and in continuing with what we had today in the morning. Now we are going to ceramics and to Tuuli Hayonen, which is online. She had been online a few seconds ago. Hello. So we are ready to hear what you're talking about your ceramics. I'm really interested in. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Christina. So let's just get this going. So, hi everyone. It's very nice to be here. Also, I would of course rather be there in Viseu with you than here on Zoom, but it is what it is. And so today I'm going to talk to you about the use of stoneware ceramics in medieval and early modern southern Finland, and especially the rural areas in southern Finland. So to get you on the map first, we are here in the northernmost parts of Europe, but in the southernmost part of Finland. And of course, as we are talking about Middle Ages and early modern period, we are actually in Sweden, as Finland was part of Sweden during this period. So I'm focusing on the southernmost part of the area of Finland in this paper, and there are two main reasons for this. First of all, the area is the place in Finland where the most extensive excavations in medieval villages have been conducted so far. And secondly, I just spent a few years working with the area myself, as I have discussed 5 sites located in central Uusimaa in my PhD thesis, which I just defended this June. So today I'll mainly focus on tableware and especially on stoneware ceramics. But on my thesis, I discussed about several different aspects of social and material world of medieval and early modern villages in southern Finland. So if you want to know more, the book is available online, so you can just look it up. So although Finland's current capital Helsinki is marked here on the map, it was actually only founded towards the end of the period I'm studying, so in the mid-16th century. And before this, there was only one small town in this whole area of Uusimaa, located some 50 kilometers east of my study area. So this means that I am really talking about a very rural area where the settlement was focused on small villages and hamlets that were mainly founded during the 12th and 13th century by both Finnish-speaking groups and people who arrived from central Sweden around this period. So based on historical sources, even the number of nobility was very low in the whole Uusimaa area, and especially in central Uusimaa, where there were only a few manors. So we are really talking about a rural peasant area here. So there are, of course, several types of sources you can use when you study medieval and early modern villages. And of course, first of all, you have the written sources. But when you are working with medieval or even early modern Finland, unfortunately, there is only quite a small number of these available. They are very few in the Middle Ages, and their number only starts to increase in the mid-16th century. And the written sources are, of course, good source material because they can provide a lot of information about the inhabitants of the villages and the livelihoods, especially agriculture. But unfortunately, they offer very little information on tableware that was used, as we lack things like probate inventories, unfortunately. And vessels are sometimes mentioned in the written documents, but mainly just in the early modern court records in cases where they have been used to hit people with. So unfortunately, written sources don't help that much if you want to study tableware or table culture. We also have some pictorial sources in medieval and early modern Finland, and these are mainly church paintings, quite similar to those that Mette showed us a few days ago. And these can offer quite detailed information about material culture, But unfortunately, again, tableware is quite rarely pictured in them. So this painting from Lohja Church, which is located quite close to my study area, is one of the few ones I have managed to find so far. So when you want to study the use of ceramics, of course, the best material available is the archaeological material, which we luckily have from the sites in central Uusimaa. So the different sources provide different types of information about the subject. But even though written records and pictorial sources don't offer that much information about the use of different types of ceramics, they are still useful for this kind of study as well, because they offer the overall context of the use of tableware. So when we are discussing medieval and early modern Finland and southern Finland, stoneware was by no means the only type of ceramics that was used. In the early Middle Ages, in Finnish context early, but in practice from 12th to early 14th century, the most common type of ceramics that was used in southern Finland was a very wide group of different types of low-fired earthenware, which were mainly used for cooking. And after the use of low-fired earthenware started to cease in the 14th century, redware started to become the most common type of ceramics used. It was also mainly used for cooking, but of course also as tableware somewhat. But then, as a third group, we have the stoneware, which is the one I'm most interested in today. So the use of proto-stoneware in Uusimaa started during the late 13th century, and stoneware started to become more common during the mid-14th century. And in contrast to low-fired earthenware and redware, stoneware was mainly used for serving and consuming drinks, because it was not suitable for using for cooking. So also all these ceramics are found at the same sites. They had different uses. And when we are discussing this group, stoneware is found in least numbers, and the numbers are quite small compared to the other types of ceramics. So we have several types of ceramics in medieval Uusimaa, and of course we have several types of houseware, household goods. So why did I choose stoneware today? So this is mainly because stoneware has quite long held a somewhat special meaning in Finnish rural archaeology. The presence of stoneware at rural sites in Finland has been, and still sometimes is, was interpreted as a sign of high social status of the site in question. So there are several reasons for this. And firstly, not too many rural sites have been excavated so far, actually. So the material to compare with your own finds isn't that large at the moment. So it is quite often that we tend to overemphasize the unique nature of single finds, because there are not that many finds available at the moment. And especially the finds that we have are concentrated in certain areas. And secondly, all the stoneware that was used in medieval Finland was, of course, clearly imported. So before it could reach the southern peasants or inhabitants of southern Finland, it had to be transported to the north, and the peasants would have to get it from somewhere, which would, of course, require some capital and contacts. So, however, almost all the other types of ceramics used in southern Finland were actually also imported during the Middle Ages and early modern period as well. So this alone isn't really that special, it's turning out. But still, it's with stoneware, it's more clear than other types of ceramics. And thirdly, stoneware has been seen as a type of luxury goods because of its function. All the peasants needed ceramic or metal cookingware, of course, if they wanted to prepare food over fire. And if this wasn't manufactured locally, of course, they would have to import it. But when you just wanted to serve drinks, you could as well have used wooden vessels that you could manufacture locally. So in this way, stoneware, of course, had a somewhat special function. So there are several reasons why stoneware has gotten this special place among pottery we find in medieval and early modern Finland. But as I went through the material from the 5 villages I studied for my PhD thesis, I ended up with 2 questions. First of all, is stoneware really so rare that it can be called an exceptional sign of high-class milieus? And secondly, if the relationship between stoneware and social studies isn't that straightforward, how are these two actually connected, and what is the role of context in this? So as part of my thesis, I went through the archaeological material from these 5 villages, and I soon noticed that in contrast to previous conceptions, stoneware appears to have been used quite frequently in the villages of southern Finland. It has been actually found at all the sites I studied for my thesis, and also at other sites which have been extensively excavated in Uusimaa. However, it is at the moment quite difficult to compare these to other areas in Finland, as the research has mainly focused in Uusimaa, but there are interesting results coming also from other parts as we speak. The vessels that were used in Uusimaa mainly originated from Siegburg and Lower Saxony areas, but also vessels originating from other places were used. And it is likely that most of these vessels reach Uusimaa via Tallinn on the other side of the Gulf of Finland in Estonia, as the peasants from Uusimaa had lively connections across the Gulf of Finland through their trading networks. The amount of stoneware varies notably between the sites, and in some cases, even between different farmsteads in a single village. At the 5 sites I worked with, the number of proto-stoneware and stoneware vessels was typically quite small, only between 3 to 15 vessels per site. So this would mean that in average, most of the farms only owned 1 or 2 vessels over the period of hundreds of years. However, these are only the minimum numbers, of course. As has been discussed in several papers during this week, the archaeological material isn't really representative of the complete past material culture, but instead it is only a selection of it. So this is really evident with the ceramics found at medieval rural sites in Finland. So we unfortunately don't get these beautiful whole pots or whole vessels as this one that has been found in a wreck in the close to the Finnish coast. But instead we only get small shards, and it is quite typical that a single vessel is only represented by a single shard of ceramics. So this suggests that many vessels are likely not represented in the material at all. And this is likely partly explained by the fact that we tend to excavate quite small trenches here in Finland, but also it is even more likely connected to the waste, as the waste was treated in medieval Finland, which we still know quite little about at the moment. But still, despite the material not being completely representative, it clearly shows differences between the different farms and villages. So in order to discuss these differences and the possible reasons behind them, I'll now take a closer look into 3 cases. So first, we start with Munkby. Based on the first written records concerning the village, it was a normal peasant village in the 16th century. However, archaeological excavations have shown that from mid-14th to mid-15th century, one of the farms in the village was quite exceptional. The main building of the farm was a 2-roomed cottage, which around this time was a typical type of building for nobility or town burghers in Sweden and Finland, but is quite rarely found in peasant villages. The finds connected to the building were also special and contained shards from several glass beakers and several personal objects, the finest of them bearing a coat of arms figure. The finds also included shards originating from at least 6 stoneware vessels, all originating from Siegburg area. It has been discussed if the inhabitants may have belonged to a noble family, and based on the exceptional assemblage of material and some later historical indications, this is possible, although as we discussed yesterday during Andrei's presentation, it is of course very hard to tell this from only the archaeological material. It is also possible that the inhabitants were exceptionally wealthy peasants, but in any case, the family living here was clearly both able and willing to purchase stoneware. As the stoneware here is quite homogeneous and comes from a single origin, it's possible that the family was able to acquire it using the same suppliers over longer periods. So in the case of Munkby, the large amount of stoneware seems to have been connected to the wealth and status of the inhabitants. However, not all the wealthy and well-connected farms seem to have been this willing to purchase a lot of stoneware. So in the village of Mortensby, some 20 kilometers east of Munkby, one of the farms is known to have been exceptionally wealthy and well-connected based on written records. The peasants living on this farm, called Lillas, specialized in large-scale trade to Tallinn, and in the 1570s, the farm was the second wealthiest in the whole parish. An unusual number of sources treating the farm have survived from the late 15th century onwards, and these show that the farm owned an expensive ship they used in the overseas trade, and the peasants also used their wealth to purchase land. However, the archaeological material from the farm doesn't stand out from the other villages or farms in the area. In the early 16th century, when the farm was most engaged in trade, the only exceptional thing in its material culture was a large cellar, possibly used to store the traded goods. The finds from the farm include shards originating from at least 6 stoneware vessels, but based on the dating and the find contexts, only 1 or 2 of these were used in the 16th century, when the farm was at its wealthiest. So although the farm was wealthy and connected to town burghers in Tallinn, the inhabitants don't seem to have been too interested about fine tableware, at least before the early 17th century. So if we are using the presence of stoneware as a sign of social status, we would completely miss out on cases like Mortensby and Lillas. So the first 2 examples were wealthy farmsteads, but the use of stoneware was not only connected to the wealthiest villages. My third example is the village Mäkkylä, located halfway between the 2 first villages I have discussed. There are no written documents mentioning Mäkkylä before mid-16th century, even though the village was founded during the late 12th century by the latest. In the text records from mid-16th century, the village is among the poorest ones in the parish, with several of the peasants mentioned separately as being poor. And unfortunately for people living here, things didn't get any better for them after mid-16th century. And in 1577, the village was raided by Russian troops who basically destroyed the whole village. And after this, the farms ended up struggling until the end of the century, when the mayor of the newly founded town of Helsinki purchased the farms and forced the peasants to move. So, despite the peasants in Mäkkylä not doing so well, their material culture was quite similar to other villages in the area. The finds from the excavated 3 farms include shards from at least 6 stoneware vessels, which seem to have belonged to at least 2 of the farmsteads. At least one of the vessels seems to have been purchased first after the raid in 1577, alongside with glass vessels, glass windows, and imported cloths, all of which doesn't tell about the same poverty as the written records from the same period. So it seems that even farms that were not doing so well were able and willing to purchase imported goods, including stoneware. So to conclude, based on the archaeological material from Uusimaa, the old idea of stoneware simply indicating high status sites in medieval and early modern rural Finland is quite outdated. In Uusimaa, stoneware was used in most of the villages, and it does not automatically indicate high social status of a farmstead or a village. Clearly, it was such a central part of tableware that even the less well-to-do farmsteads were both able and also willing to purchase it. But on the other hand, some of the wealthy peasants rather invested their wealth on something else. It seems that in cases where a single farm used a lot of stoneware vessels, it likely is an indication of wealth, connections, or exceptional social status. But in these cases, stoneware is just one sign of the social position. So all in all, the use of stoneware in medieval and early modern Finland is a good reminder that household goods are always contextual. The presence or absence of objects always has to be weighed against the overall context of the site, as objects had different meanings for different people at different times. Thank you.
So thank you, Julie, very much. Let us come directly to questions. Are there anyone? it was really clear what you talk about. So I don't know if it's it could be interesting to hear directly the next, which is also about ceramic, from Rainer Atzbach, and then to discuss everything. Oh, sorry. Yeah, yes, of course. There's some. Yeah.
Tully, hi. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that paper. And my observation is more of a remark than a question. The range of pottery that you're experiencing in Finland seems very, very similar to that which we find in Ireland. And you have that sort of, I mean, personally, I love stoneware. It's just such a very tactile and attractive ceramic, but we have it in similarly small enough quantities on many, many different sites, whether they're urban or rural. And we have different terms for your local ware, your cooking ware. But I just see a lot of parallels, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Niall. That's very interesting to hear. And it sounds that Finland and Ireland share quite a few traits when it comes to rural archaeology. So I think I should look up your material from Ireland as well.
Yeah, I can confirm it from Luxembourg. At the beginning, we thought, oh, that must be something special, and then it's become more and more usual to find something like this on rural sites. So yeah, it must be a little bit different.
Hi, Tully. Could you tell me more about the proportion between the stoneware from Siegburg and the stoneware from Waldenburg? Because you mentioned the Lower Saxony stoneware, and I think they come from Waldenburg, yes?
Some comes from Waldenburg, and there are also some other places, but Siegburg is definitely the number one. And the wares from Lower Saxony are not so concentrated to a single manufacturing center. But we also have some Waldenburg. But Siegburg it takes up over half of the overall material, clearly.
Thank you very much.
Some more arguments? So let us come finally to Rainer Schreck. Sorry. One online question, okay. Coming from whom? Rika Tevali?
Hello, thank you, Tully, for the lovely presentation. I wanted to ask, you said and you concluded that stoneware was not a mark of luxury as much, and we should always consider the context. So I was just, what do you think about stoneware being connected to the consumption of beer? Because beer was obviously a big part of rural culture and medieval culture in general, whether that stoneware was basically the lesser sort of vessel just meant for the consumption of beer.
Thank you, Rika. I'm sure you are on something here because, of course, drinking culture was very important in the Middle Ages. And of course, in Finland, drinking culture is important part of the culture even now. So yeah, I think definitely the fact that we have so much nice tableware for drinking must be connected to the drinking culture. And I think it's something that people likely picked up in Tallinn because the contacts between Uusimaa and Tallinn were so tight during this period. So yes, I'm sure that beer played a central role in this all.
Thank you.
There's one last question now coming in my head, in my mind. The rural side, do you have some signs if there's at least a connection with a more noble side between the village and the owners or not? I'm asking because what we saw in Luxembourg is that the sites we excavated, these rural sites, are at least connected with noble ones. And so we thought at the beginning, and that must be confirmed or not, that it could be something like a gift. If someone made something for the noble, and then he looked at his household and he didn't, oh yeah, I can make a gift, so give, it could be also a way how to complete your household. I hope that I
I understand what you are going for, Christina. Yes, I think you are right in that even some of the pots here may be gifts rather than purchased, but I think they are, in this case, rather gifts from the merchants the people had contacts with, because we really didn't have that much nobility here in the Middle Ages. And the nobility we had, we don't really know that much about. So we have quite a similar situation as Andre was talking about yesterday, or as Niklas mentioned, having been in the Eastern Central Europe.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So finally, Rainer, yes, of course.
Dear friends, dear colleagues, you may guess the last paper should be the highlight. I can promise you it will not be the one highlight. I will show up you later on the other highlights we had before. What I want to do is kind of a review of the state of the art on ceramic research in southern Germany, mainly southwestern Germany. Ceramics are in the most regions the most common find material in rural sites. Maybe the second one are iron naves, at least in the sites I had a look on. With some exceptions, this is true, because in some regions we found probably rather wooden, or we don't find, but there were probably rather wooden vessels, soapstone or skin containers. So, because ceramic is so important, we need to think how we can do something more than just a typochronological approach, and to do something more than just chronology. If I look at the ceramic research in southwestern Germany, this is still the case that we are mainly dealing with the chronology. But we need to think of ceramics as well as household goods. They refer on many aspects of daily life, especially on cooking, but also on the house climate. I will show you later on socioeconomic situations. The last one is the main point I will go for. So, as I said before, research in medieval pottery in southern Germany focused on chronological issues for a quite long time. And further questions were often related, if they were, with ethnic and social interpretation. So the question we already had in some of the papers, is there a difference between the rural side and the noble side? Or in many cases, is there an ethnic differentiation between ceramics? So I just go quite short through different aspects. Cooking with ceramics, it's a huge possibility to do some more research. We should have more attention for useware. We should have also a little bit more inclusion of pictorial evidence. And experimental archaeology, it's done at the moment rather for the broad public, but it doesn't have distinct research questions. But there are many. For example, to understand the useware, and to understand, for example, how cooking is really going on in different pots. What is quite interesting, it was kind of an experiment I did by myself, involuntarily, when I left some pots in the garden last winter. And so I recognized they are breaking in specific pattern. And I remembered that I often have seen this in the archaeological materials, on some cooking pots shattered by frost. So this is a quite interesting aspect on the temperature in the kitchen. So we need to do a little bit more experimental archaeology on that, a little bit more systematic, and probably with a little bit more authentic materials. So let's come to the socio-economic situation. That's where I want to have my focus. It's about the ways of consumption, traditions, and identity. It's about production and distribution. All these topics I mentioned require, on the one hand, a theoretical framework. We are dealing with social practices, and we need to refer to material cultural studies. There's a lot of theories out there. But we even need more detailed knowledge of the ceramic finds. Typology is still important. Chronology is the basis. We need to deal with the modes of production, and we need urgently to have a reliable overview of the archaeological material. Now, all this is not about typology. My paper is also not about typology, and neither balisming, which I will show you later on, is on typology. It's an aim of balisming, so you will learn about it. It's to provide easy information on ceramic production and to present a database for southern Germany, at least for the beginning. So maybe there are people who will be interested in that. It's my aim in this paper to understand the socio-economic change in rural communities between the 8th and the 14th century. And the problem is we will need to deal with typology, at least to a certain degree. I try to avoid to show you too much rim shirts. I will try to have just a rough typology based on forming and firing. So yeah, we learned already something about this topic yesterday, especially the ones who are live here. So we have forming and firing as some very important points for structuring our ceramic finds. In southern Germany, we usually have 3 technical groups. So that's the handmade pottery, mainly the prehistoric and early stuff. We have turntable shaped pottery. So this is not a really fast, thrown turntable. It's just to work on the pot from different sides. And we have the wheel thrown wares. And this is a very important basis for typology. For example, we have in the Merovingian period this handmade pottery, some examples from the Ulm area. Then we have in the Franconia area, the so-called Slavic ceramics. This is a situation where this ethnic interpretation is still of some importance, but it's probably wrong. And so I will try to refer, for example, for this kind of ceramics, not anymore to Slavic ceramic, but to handgemachte Grobware. So coarse earthenware. And it's very important to have it specifically drawn to one region, and because terminology is often quite difficult and the same terms are used for quite different materials in different regions, it's also very important always to give an hint for which period we are dealing in, which period we are dealing with. Turntable shaped pottery, we have many of them. I just show again some examples from the region of Ulm. So this is some mica containing materials. Here are some pictures showing that this is a material which is of quite long period. It starts already in the Merovingian period and it lasts to the 12th or even 13th century. And it's still a problem today to have a good chronology, because these are mainly simple pots and outcurved rims. Decoration is simple, mainly wavy lines, and there are only few archaeological contexts giving you a stratigraphy. So churches normally include just very few pottery sherds. And before the beginning of castles and urbans, there are quite few excavations with a reliable stratigraphy. It's quite hard to have this material, in some order, in some classification. But we can see that there are some regional differences. And now that's mainly the rim sherds. I won't show you in detail. On the current state of research, only very few of these groups are clearly defined. So it's at the moment a mixture of some groups we really can describe and some regions where we are really on the beginning. But you can see there are several local groups of this turntable-shaped wares. And for the wheel-thrown wares, this is typical for, that's the problem, not only for the late Middle Ages, it's also typical for many wares of the early Middle Ages. I just show this example of late medieval grey wheel-thrown ware, which is quite common everywhere, and many of you may recognize some rim forms which are familiar also from other regions. So what we can trace in the late Middle Ages, that is that we overcome this high regionality. There are still regional groups, but there are some common features over large areas from the Carpathian Basin, I think, to central France. The other point from the firing is we have different methods, and the differentiation between pit burning, kilns and stove, that's a rather rough typology. You can see different possibilities how you will do it. The differences are in the firing temperature and on the control of the firing conditions. And it needs different skills to do this. And we will see for many of these different wares, we probably also have different firing technology. But we only can check this by experimental archaeology. We just have very few kiln sites which help. For the wheel-thrown wares, already in the 1960s, Uwe Lobedey, he distinguished early and later wheel-thrown wares, ältere und jüngere Drehscheibenwaren. He related for the early wares to the Rhinish production sites. You may know Pinkstolf. And he took some rather stylistic arguments for that differentiation. But nevertheless, he already mentioned that there may be some differences in production and distribution. If we have a closer look on the different wares today, this is just a selection on the chronology. So it's from the right, that's the migration period, and on the left, it's the early modern period. So we have some wares which are just for a rather short time period, and we have other ones which last for quite a long time. But we are able to make a difference of different phases. The first phase, it's characterized by early wheel-thrown wares. It has been related to large manorial organizations, as for example, the Weisenburg monastery. So we can see here a distribution map Here is Weißenburg in black. These are the positions of the monastery in red. These are the find spots of ältere gelbe Drehscheibenware, of an early form of this ware. And I'm not very convinced for this correlation, but this is the state of the art, that these early wares are connected with manorial organization. What we can see in the second phase, that's a reduced spatial distribution. That's still the first phase. You can see that there is, the distribution area is 150 kilometers from the north to the south, so it's quite large. The second phase has reduced distribution areas of wheel-thrown earthenware, and it has an increased importance of turntable-shaped pottery. I mentioned already, this is of relatively low quality, low fired. There's a broad variety of forming and firing techniques in this group. But what is interesting, despite of the low quality, these finds often show traces of repair. And this is an indication that this material was not all times available, and it may have been a seasonal production. So something is changing. We can see here the distribution area of the second phase, so it's smaller than what we had before. That's one of these turntable shaped wares. The distribution areas are smaller. We are now even able to make some more regional differentiation within this. And this is an example for one of these repair traces. It's my impression, but I don't have statistical data, that this repair is more often found on rural sites than on the castles, where we also have this low quality ware in some examples. The third phase, that's now these later wheel-thrown wares. They are related to urban production and needs. They are distributed via a market, at least often, not always. They have an improved quality, and they also have an increased spectrum of vessel forms, and they have some kind of an internationalization. So we can find similar techniques over large areas and similar forms, also rim forms. I don't want to go into the detail of this graphic, despite of the fact that it's in German. It should just show you that these different phases, you can think about the process of this change. And so we have this, the first phase, we have the second phase, and the third phase, that there are some, kind of logical ways connected with new organization of feudalism, to take this outdated term, with market organization, with urbanization. So there is a distinct idea what is behind, and we also can have a comparison between the economic history and the development of the ceramics. I also don't want to go into the details. What is important is, at one point there was probably a change in the manorial organizations, giving some other economic background to the single households. So if it's true that the manorial organization was behind the distribution of the ceramics in this first phase, this was lost in the second one, when the manorial organization was rather based on the money, and people at the farms don't have the money to pay for the ceramics, so they try to have a production on a rather regional level. And the third phase, the urbanization, this brings again a market and another production structure. So this is a theory, and theory has normally challenges. And one of them, many of them, correlation with big manorial systems is limited. There are some other examples where it's not very convincing. Even the example I showed you, I'm not convinced that this is true. And new finds in the last years, they show a more detailed differentiation of these large wares. So we now learn about some more local productions also in this situation. We still lack of production sites during phase 2, but maybe this was just because it was a kiln or pit burning. We should probably find kiln burning maybe, and it's also problematic to date or to have a little bit more information of the beginning of this urban pottery production. We have many studies on urban pottery in many towns, but it's always focusing on the chronology, and it's not really compared from one town to the other. And it's also true, I mentioned already, that we have an increasing number of finds, and this make always even more refined typology. And even for the wares where we had in mind central production, we now find some rather rural context of production. So the picture, and another example, it's for this turntable shaped ware, already in context from the 1930s. There are many difficulties in this overall picture. What can we do to go forward? And now this is the time to introduce you a little bit more in detail to Ballismink. Ballismink is an online system, Bamberger Lehr- und Informationssystem zur mittelalterlichen, neuzeitlichen Keramik. So therefore there is a need for an abbreviation. It means the Bamberg system for teaching and researching medieval and early modern ceramics. It's based on Wikimedia. It aims for a terminological clarification. It wants to provide support in the analysis and determination of archaeological ceramic finds, at the moment at least for Southwestern and Southern Germany. But it also aims to go beyond these chronological questions and to provide material to have the questions I mentioned before a little bit more worked on. Ballismink has different categories. What it will provide information and terminology on handwork, handcraft production techniques. It will inform about scientific methods, and the main important point, it's basic knowledge on the materials. It includes definitions of all these wares, of rim forms, of vessel forms, and it should bring an inventory of important sites, showing you the basic materials. And for sure it should give you research resources, basic bibliography, but also what is now available online. And in future, I also think it should be possible to have some teaching materials, videos, different materials, really to have this also in university classes, but also for broader public. So to have all these metal detectorists, to have a possibility also to be interested in ceramics, if they are going out and collecting all the materials from our sites. So they should at least have a little bit more background. What is interesting in working with this Ballismink, it brings to your mind that you need to have a little bit more clarification on some things. So it's going back towards a rather relative chronology system, because we had the situation in Southwestern Germany in the 1960s. Uwe Lobedey, who was a pioneer on working with the ceramics, he established a relative chronological system, which was quite fine. But later on, colleagues just started always to give absolute datings. They thought it would be easier for the colleagues from history to deal with the archaeological material. And maybe to some point this was true, but chronology changed, absolute chronology changed, and now it's a complete mess with all these datations. So are they still valid? it would have been much more easier. Oh, that's phase B, and now that's 30 years later than before. So it would be much more reliable to work with these relative chronology phases. It's just as an example how this looks like in the system. At the moment there are 230 articles. This is one of these wheel stoneware. So we will have a table at the beginning, just giving you some of the most important informations. What is the advantage of this Wikimedia? It's later on possible to have it on the mobile phone, and you should be able later on to have some kind of automatic translation. So then it wouldn't be necessary to show you here a German slide. So I mentioned that recent research challenges the hypothesis of this turntable wares as a rural production in this second phase. And this is, this shows we need to think a little bit more how ceramic was used in the households. That's, still an important question. And I don't need to go through this details for these different phases. What is important is we still have more questions than answers. And I think it is important on the one hand to have good theories in the background, but you also need to have a good databases and good knowledge on the materials. And that's what we try to do with Ballismink. And if there are people who are interested in working with that, they are very welcome. It's still not open because it's in a first stage. We first want to have some, the articles which are now there are in a good shape to go to a broader public and to invite all people who use Ballismink. Okay, thank you very much.
So Rainer, thank you very much for this overview. I will look around. Are there any comments, questions about ideas? Yeah, Bert.
Thank you very much for this presentation. We're more or less on the same path, I see. I was wondering, this archaeological evidence of pottery production is very important in relation to your research question and your hypothesis. Would it be possible that there's a major archaeological visibility between large-scale centralized production and small-scale local production? That could be a problem, I guess. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's in
perhaps
fact
also the differences in preservation of landscapes where some parts have been more plowed out than other parts.
Yeah, that's in fact a problem at the moment. So we have quite few kiln sites or ovens for this turntables shaped wares. And if we have a closer look on them, the evidence we have is rather on the ones with the better quality. The ceramics which are often repaired, low fired, we don't have a production evidence. And this may be because this is another firing technology, which is not easily detectable in the archaeological context. And we don't know whether this production took place within the settlements or outside, probably rather outside. So we have a real gap there. There are some sites, but as I said before, that's rather the better quality of this turntable shaped wares.
It's quite interesting. When I saw the ceramic with the hole for the reparation, we do have this also in castles. So there I can't really, but it's what it's the same. It's the not so good ceramic, which is repaired.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Yeah.
this repair
But
is
also on castles.
this repair is also to be found in castles.
Yeah.
But we urgently should do some statistics. So that's from an empirical impression that we have more of these repairs on the rural sites. But I haven't counted it. So
Yeah, but it's a good idea to look after it. To have this in mind. Thank you. Someone else? Someone coming from the internet? No?
Can I make a comment?
Oh, that was brief.
Sorry.
Heiner,
Okay.
you can
some
continue.
conclusions. Okay, I thought how I could do some conclusions, and I found it very difficult. So I decided it's the best I start reading for you all the abstracts. No? Okay, so the second I thought I could put the questions we had in the call for paper and to compare this with what we had in the papers. But I also decided not to do this because we had a lot of questions and we had a lot of papers. But if there are some gaps, they are rather by occasion who reacted on our call for papers. And I don't think this will bring us forward to see which kind of questions we didn't have answered now here. I thought it could be helpful to do it a little bit in a different way. And so I have some more slides for you. What we have seen are very different methodological approaches. Some of us looked at the micro scale, some analysis of space of single households. Some of us refer to surveys rather on the level of the village lands. And some of us, including my own paper, they were rather on the analysis of finds, ceramics, blocks, keys. It were different categories of material cultures we had a look on. The finds, the ceramics, the keys and locks, but also on the houses as a part of material culture. And these different methods, these different find categories, they brought up very different perspectives. The single household, this small scale excavations, the perspective of the household within the local communities. Some we have seen the analysis of villages and looking for differences in the households. And for sure, again, it was the perspective of material culture. But what they all had in common, this was that it was arced rather from an empirical basis. We had you may correct me, but I haven't recognized as, I don't dare to say as a highlight because, we don't have seen an outstanding theory-driven paper. It started with some habitus, or this all started somehow with the archaeological record. That's not a critique, it's an observation. And I think what was quite clear looking on the conferences that we made progress in the last decades. I show you some slides from a previous paper I've given somewhere else. It was reflecting on the changing concepts of society and space. And some decades ago, we dealt with hierarchies. We asked for identity and who belongs to what kind of a group. It's still an important topic, but we look today in a different way on this. I will show you later. We often had space in two-dimensional space, distribution maps. So still not outdated. I also used them just some minutes ago. But the interest was on territories, on this distributions in itself. And quite often it was about center and periphery in that stage. That's kind of a social archaeology which has been done some years ago, and to some degree it's still important today. But what changed in recent years, that there is another understanding of society. Now they are rather networks. Identity is rather on the individual level. It's rather on, now it's a problem with the translation. In German, it's much more easier to make a difference between Macht and Herrschaft. In English, both should be power. So that's a little bit change, but this is maybe a German point of view, because we still have, maybe it's better to use the past terms. We had quite ideas from history coming from the 19th century, so rather the top-down perspectives. And now it's a little bit more bottom-up. Space is different. It's much more as a landscape. It's the environment which is interesting, not anymore just the distribution maps. So we have today a more complex understanding of society. And I found it remarkable that without addressing the theory behind, most of the papers we have heard here, they have already a little bit more complex ideas about society. So all of, we often heard about it's not so easy, complexity, and the single case studies we had, they often showed, the challenges we have. So nobody really used all these terms quite fixed on, and they were very reflected. Coming back to the introduction of Bert, he dealt about formation processes, and I just took here a slide again in German, but many of the terms are nevertheless English ones. I will focus a little bit more on that. This is the formation processes over several stages, from the past reality to the reconstructed past. What is the result of our work, or should be some kind the result of our work. A little bit closer on that slide. So we have the primary formation. So that's what people did in the past with the household goods we were interested in. We often had the question of whether fine concentration is activity zone or rather the dump. Sometimes I found it a little bit difficult, the interpretations we heard, because we should have a little bit more attention on that problem. We had one paper, it was not very well understandable about the small species. Analysis of what we can find in a single household regarding debris, regarding waste, and especially regarding the microfauna. And that's a very important point to have this on that stage of the primary formation, because it shows you again what is the reality in a household, in a house. It's about dirt. It's about, not the people, the animals who are living with you. And not only sheep and goat, but also mice, rats, and even on the insect basis, which is very important in history. So if we have a look on the changes, for example, in the 14th century, which can be understood as an ecological crisis, these small animals, the rats, the fleas, they are very important factors in that process. And if we want to understand these time periods, these changes, we need to have a clear special attention on this. So the primary formation to understand what was in a household was a topic we had for several times, and which is quite important, I think. But we also had many papers dealing with the secondary formation. So this is what happens after a house was abandoned. The question which came up for several times, the number of metal finds, some amazing numbers of metal finds at some sites. Is this a question of the primary or the secondary formation? That's especially true for the question of the wooden artifacts. So that's probably most often a problem of the secondary formation, whereas the number of metal finds, that's rather something of the primary formation, because it's probably what people did with this. It's about behavior of the people in the past, which is interesting for us. So I'm not very interested in the secondary formation as a process, because it's rather what people later on did and disturbed our databases. But nevertheless, it's important to reflect this. At the end of the primary and the secondary formation, we have something what I like to call the archaeological potential. That's all the stuff which is out there, which we need to find, to excavate, to analyze. It's there, we just need to take it. But taking this is another problem, and I used here the terms of a tertiary and quaternary formation, because this is about the conditions, how we are able to work in the field. It's about the state of the art, because this triggers the research questions. It's about the possibilities to work out in the field. On one side, the technical possibilities, but also the legal possibilities. And it's the quality, how do we record all this data? And then we have the level of the interpretation. And this is quite important thing, because here are all these theories important. How do we analyze the materials? What are we interested in? I just have two small red marked terms here on that slide, because I think this was less represented in our papers, to think about the framework for our interpretation. We had, again, this paper on the microfinds, which I think is important to have a little bit more attention to this. This was, it specifically dealt with this methodological possibilities in recording data. Well, we have the nature culture concept. Most other papers didn't point to a certain theory, but they were quite often in the background, unexpressed. I think it would be worth to have a little bit more thought about what is the theory in my background. Do we understand the artifacts as something which is passive? Or is there some kind of an agency of the artifacts? What are they doing with people? If there are some technical possibilities which were not there before, this may change society. And I can't remember, we had many papers dealing with some changes, but we had little explanations for these connections. We also had quite few reflections on what is a household. Again, there were some papers dealing with that, but I don't see a clear answer. Do we think about assemblages of finds as a household? Many papers made distribution maps on some single settlements and talked of households related to some find concentrations. Again, a matter of primary and secondary formation. But looking a little bit closer on the theories in the background, what is interesting, for example, is to ask for peasants' agency. What was the role of households in forming history on the regional level, on a greater level? And people, every household has to take decisions at one point. The freedom they have is different. What is the role of the household goods in that situation? They made strategies possible, how people could react to new challenges. Locks and keys. Is this something because of wealth or something because of unsecurity? That's the question we had today. So artifacts, part of the reaction of people, it's a reaction of historical processes, but they are also triggering probably these processes. So I think this is something we should have a little bit more in mind in future. So these were just some thoughts. And I tried to point on the things I missed, but I want to end my conclusions with another statement. We didn't have one single paper which was below level. These were all wonderful papers. They really had a broad variety of topics, and I'm very sure every single one here and in the internet has learned something from his own interests, because we really had a very broad range of topics. So there was something for everyone. But we need to think a little bit more how this is related. I had, in fact, some problems now to group the papers again. And maybe this is something we should think for the publications, how we could rearrange probably the papers in a better way. Probably it will be a little bit more, clear that people see what our empiric case studies really bring in results, even if we don't start with big theories. But nevertheless, we should have them a little more in mind. Okay. I hope this will give you some starting point for discussion.
Thank you very much, Rainer, for this trying to conclude with nothing to conclude, because that was such a broad range, as you stated. And it was for us as organizers also very difficult to find some common links and to make these 6 sessions we've made just on the base of the abstracts, and you never know what they will talk when they give the paper itself. So thank you very much for your comments, which was very broad, and yes, what can be, what was, and what can be done in the paper. So I would like to ask you to comment the comment of Rainer. Everyone is tired.
I didn't think I was as evil that nobody wants to talk to me anymore.
No, I only had one point in one of your last slides, and the fourth point you made through the analysis, the fourth point you said, no, it's not that one, reconstruction of the, isn't it, of the past, isn't it a construction by us?
It is rather a construction, and the reconstruction never fits to the past reality. So that's, yeah, for sure.
Yes, so I think that is also an important point we have to have in our mind, that what we do is not reconstruct something, but we, through our interpretation, reconstruct.
Yeah, I think we all aim for reconstruction, but the best we can do is a construction.
Yes. Well, that was one of my points. Other points, please. You don't.
Starting point. I very much liked your observations on the subject. When you choose a subject like material culture for Ruralia, it's likely, it's almost self-evident that much papers become evidence-based, because the starting point is material culture. So if you, how should this be, what can you do to help this? Maybe there can be an invitation to the writer of the papers. I hope they have not all written their papers, to address something of what you be more explicit about their theoretical starting points, or what they have in the back of their minds before they started that excavation. That could be a post-conference invitation, perhaps.
Yeah, I don't think this is a huge problem. So evidence-based and empiric studies, they have their own right. They are not bad science.
Yes, you presented one yourself.
But, yeah. But it would help some people who had to do some conclusions to declare a little bit more what they had in mind. And it makes it much more easier to communicate in a broader framework. So yesterday in the evening, we had the discussion after the dinner, how we can reach, overcome very regional studies to have them relevant for larger areas. Therefore, we need some abstract level, and we need to use theories for that. But it's fine if you have a local case study and to show people in your region what was going on in the past.
You mean it would also be fine if there was a bit more contextualization?
In our context, where we really have papers from Russia to Portugal, across Europe, we need something more to bring this together. And I wonder whether this is the point where theories could help. We also could take the narrative, have a look how different all these situations are. But we need to decide whether this is the right narrative, or if we want to choose, we want to show how close they are nevertheless, how European they are all. So this is a little bit tricky. But yeah, I think we need to think how we can bring this a little bit closer together. And this has something to do with narratives, the theories. And there has been a lot of progress in recent years thinking about all these things. But this mainly comes, all this theoretical debate starts with theory. Serial debates should start with the practice, with the narratives. They should ask, what do we want to learn?
Further comments, ideas, remarks? What I thought during these last 5 days, and also during your comments, that maybe the topic of the conference itself was too broad. So that the range of the papers was so broad, as you pointed out, as you stressed, and that is now the difficulty. And if we have focused on a more tighter topic, that would be it's not such a broad range.
Yeah.
But it is as it is now, and maybe it's just a starting point.
I must say that I was very glad about this variety, to see the colleagues which are interpreting the theme just so different. It's opened the mind, so I'm really glad about it. I must say, if you are not really at that point that you proposed that we should be, but it was a good base. It was a good beginning for me.
It was a good base, and I think it was also very interesting for our community because, but that's for our community, maybe not for wider outreach. We had a lot of topics which we had already in past conferences. So we have in some points, we had an update. That was quite interesting. So I don't have a negative conclusion. That's yes, I went there.
Sorry, Rainer, I'd simply say that process is ongoing, and that's one of the most attractive aspects of the conference, and it's recurring every 2 years, in addition to the people, of course. But the fact that we continue to come back to similar topics, develop them further, and roll on. And our conference in 4 years' time on issues around community is just going to be a further dipping into this area. And I'm sure papers that were presented this year will be, aspects of them will mature in 4 years' time. They'll be, we can return to your same questions and points today in 4 years' time and see. That'll be the test. I thank you very much.
Further remarks? Do you want to answer some points?
No.
No? Okay. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you all those who were online. All the days I saw that some of the colleagues like Tuli and Michael Schmedecker, they were all the time there, and I'm very glad, and greetings to them again. And it was wonderful that we've been here together, and I'm absolutely sure again that it was the right decision that we made this conference here in Viseu in Portugal. And to take up some words Rainer said, the publication will come up, and all the speakers will get a letter with all the information you need. But just the one date, end of January, we need your manuscript, so submit it until end of January in 2022. And I ask everybody, really everybody, to keep in mind what Rainer said, to reflect, to give a good interpretation and explanations, and not only keep on that state of empiric case studies, but to go a step further. We heard it in several papers, I'm absolutely sure, but please try to reflect this again, and then we can, yes, even improve all the very good papers we already heard. And I think Rainer, where's Rainer? Where's Rainer? Sorry. Maybe I can get your presentation, and we will write some of the ideas you have in the invitation for the speakers to write the manuscript, so they have that in mind and can write it in, try to write it in that way. Okay, so what's now to do? Say goodbye. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for being with us all the time. And some of us will stay together for the next 2-3 days, and I'm very glad that we will have a wonderful time in the countryside. And we drink on Sunday we will drink, Saturday we will drink a cup of wine, a glass of wine, up to you who have to leave. And see you in 2 years. I don't know where, we will discuss it, but hopefully we see you in 2 years. Thank you very much for being here.
Well, it's very good to see you all again, and we are very glad to have you here. And I want to thanks to the streaming team, because they did a wonderful job. I hope, hopefully it went well to those that are not here. And thank you for being there too. And two small remarks for those that are going on the weekend trip excursion. Please make comfortable today, because we are going to walk. And if you have a hat, please take it with you. And those that are going at home now, be safe, go quickly, and give us news. We see each other briefly. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for my team for doing what they do. Lunch will be served in half an hour. Then we will have buses to Oporto and bus for the weekend excursion. Thank you all. Go safely.